The Chkdsk command is another one of those commands that's been around since the DOS days. And notice that I pronounced this Chkdsk. And what this little utility does is it checks the file system and the file system directory. Now, sometimes you'll hear that called the metadata of a volume for logical and physical errors. A logical error would be that the sectors aren't mapped correctly and some of the addressing may be messed up or confused. Physical errors is where we have what's called bad sectors. The drive is not retaining the magnetic data that's being placed there, whether it's a 0 or 1 or a voltage, positive or negative. And so it may write data, but then we can't reliably read it back. And so we want to check for physical errors, and that is exactly what Chkdsk will do for us. Watch for this on the exam. You have to be a member of the local administrators group to run the Chkdsk utility. And there are 3 switches that you need to be familiar with on the exam. There is the F switch, and this will actually fix errors on the disk. Chkdsk, watch for this, cannot correct errors on disks with open files. Chkdsk has to do what's called locking the disk before it can run and check all the sectors. So if you try to run this on a disk that has open files, Chkdsk will send you back a little message, a little window will pop up. I can't lock the disk. There are open files. I'm going to mark the disk, and on the next time you start the computer up, Chkdsk will run and will identify and attempt to fix errors on the disk. Now the /r command will find physical disk errors in addition to logical errors, okay? Make sure that if you want to get the physical errors in addition to the logical errors, use the R command. Now, R is the one that's most popular, and this will automatically attempt to recover any data that's in a disk sector that appears to be having problems. The last switch you need to be familiar with is the B switch, and you'll use this on NTFS formatted disks only. It clears the list of bad clusters on the volume and rescans all allocated and free clusters for errors. It resets the whole cluster list and it checks them all for errors all over again, because if you had prior ones that read as bad or threw some sort of error, it's not using those anymore, and sometimes this will get some back. You can also run the Chkdsk utility without any switches, and when you do this, it will check the disk and report the status, but it does not attempt any repairs. Anytime you run any of these disk utility tools, make sure you get a copy of your data before you run Chkdsk. You should have current backups, because sometimes these utilities will start to try to correct or fix errors on the disk, and sometimes it will cause more problems depending on how bad the corruption is. So anyway, that's Chkdsk. Just know what it does. Be familiar with those 3 switches. Go out there and play with it a little bit at a command line prompt, and you should be ready to answer questions about this guy on the exam.